Welcome to the University of Western Sydney. I'm Harold Short. Like my friend and colleague Willard McCarthy, who you'll see later, I'm visiting Professor of Digital Humanities based in Sydney for 4 months each year. On behalf of all my colleagues here at the university, I would like to say how pleased and honoured we are to be part of this global event. We send our greetings to all who are watching live and those who tune in later to the recording. Fraternal greetings in particular to our colleagues in Tokyo who have passed the baton to us, and to all the groups who have gone before us in this intellectual marathon. And our thanks to University of Alberta colleagues whose imagination lies behind it and who have planned and managed it. This session is coming to you from the Parramatta campus of our university in the wonderful city of Sydney. It is hosted by two groups, one well-established and one very new. The Institute for Culture and Society is one of the leading institutes of its kind in Australia, and its work is known and admired across the world. We are very pleased that its research director, Brett Nielsen, is taking part in our session. The director, Ian Ang, had planned to be here, but is ill and sends her apologies. The research group in Digital Humanities, by contrast, was formally established just a few months ago and is to be led by Australasia's first Professor of Digital Humanities, Paul Arthur. Although he does not take up his post for another few weeks, we are delighted that he is able to join us here today. It may be surprising to learn that the research group was established not only, or even primarily, to foster new activity, though of course it will be doing that, but to provide a supportive framework for a great deal of varied and innovative work that has been going on in the university for some considerable time. We are using our time today, therefore, to offer rather brief glimpses of some of this rich variety of work. We hope that you will find our rapid journey both interesting and informative, and in order to make sense of the journey, you may want to follow the links on the event website. Our program is linked there and has details of the speakers and the projects that will be discussed. And now I pass over to my colleague, Hart Cohen.
Thank you, Harold. Well, welcome to everyone. I would like to offer my thanks to the University of Alberta and the Cool Institute in particular for providing the opportunity for us to be able to present today and showcase our projects in the form of what I would call a kind of vernissage of materials that have been worked on and that we're contextualizing in the rubric of the digital humanities. My name is Hart Cohen, and I direct research and HDR studies in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts. And I'll be starting as well with showcasing the first project, which actually had its probably first iterative presentation at a humanities computing conference at the University of Sydney in 2003. And so I guess there was some intimation at that point that our interest, particularly in what we're calling digital culture and discoverability, had a moment in the digital humanities sun. Since that time, that project has gone through other iterations and continues to grow. I might now switch to a PowerPoint and talk over the PowerPoint, and I'll be joined by one of the members of the three team members for this project, Rachel Morley, and subsequent to this we'll have our third team member not presenting on this project but on his project in Antarctica. So we call our project Digital Culture and Discoverability, and we start with a slide by Wenton Rabuncha called The Four Corners Painting. I like this painting, and Wenton, who is now deceased, had made the point that this painting was an important representation for him of how he sees Aranda migration patterns and routes. And it gives us a sense that, I suppose in my mind, the culture generally is something that isn't and forever, in a sense, frozen, but rather moves and changes And in a way, the way our project has worked in bringing digital affordances to the area of community and other concerns, we see us also contributing to that fluid notion of culture. Okay, I think I can switch this to the next slide. Is that? So here we have just the sense that it's Australian Research Council supported research based at the University of Western Sydney, and the team is myself, Juan Salazar, Rachel Morley, and our partners are the Strello Research Center and the NT Library Services. In terms of the research track, our first iterative moment had to do with the digitization of the Strello Filmworks. This led to a catalog that was written to the Filmworks. The Filmworks themselves had never really been accessed at all, being in themselves restricted from the point of view of cultural sensitivity. But through the Strello Research Center, they afforded us the opportunity to go into the Filmworks and digitize them for research purposes, primarily accessed by appropriate groups. And so through digitization, the idea of digital repackaging became an important the effectiveness and purposes of that particular research project. The second part of the research track then looked at a particular book by T.G.H. Strello called Journey to Horseshoe Bend, and the project was named The Visual Mediation of a Complex Narrative. We were interested in taking a text, and at this point it was already established that through XML and the ability to hyperlink texts that we could find an archival set of equivalencies to what we were finding in the text. This particular memoir was written without any photographs in it, but it was written in a style that resembled a film script. And so we thought the book was extremely visual, and for that reason wanted to tie in as much as we could the visual archive. And our third iteration of this project we're calling Digital Archives and Discoverability. We've now moved into the community, if you like, and worked closely with the Indaria School and Indaria students, and they themselves are kind of creating their own archival contributions to an already established archive. We do this through various exercises in digital storytelling and see this work as moving into online learning, but also working with the preservation and management of the digital archives found in the Strello Research Center. And this is an example of some of the photographic materials that one finds there. There are over 8,000 photographs to do with Indaria and Hermannsburg in the digital archives of the Strello Research Center. Our current project is working with a Northern Territory Library Service, additional partners. They've developed a database called the Community Stories Database, and through this work we see working with the idea of intergenerational knowledge transfer, the idea of highlighting community stories, and in particular thinking about how we can work through a very extensive set of genealogies developed by both Carl and T.G.H. Strello, with the idea of linking those to the people living today. And I think on that note I'll just pass to Rachel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hart. Just in a few minutes, I'll talk a little bit about the Community Stories database that we're using to archive and house the story. A couple of weeks ago, Juan, Hart and myself travelled to Indaria, the community that you can see a photograph taken from here, and we began the digital stories process. We worked with years, and we work with them to encourage them to tell stories about their sporting environment. Some of them told stories about their families, tracing back through lineages and ancestral stories, and others worked with some mythological stories around some science fiction studies that they were doing in their classroom. And together we helped the students take photographs, to write the stories, and then to develop a digital narrative that we are going to then bring into this digital stories database. And what we're really keen to start doing is connecting the stories of the present and people living in the community today with some of the ancestral stories, and the narratives that work out of the Journey to Horseshoe Bend narrative that we were looking at in the project before, and thinking about the ways that the past and the present connect. And ideally, we'd like to use a digital form in order to begin tracking between past and present, linking the archives up with the present, to really to conceptualise the cultural heritage and knowledge practices of the existing communities, but also those that are held in the archival collections, to think about the discoverability potential of the archives of the Strello collection, and really wanting to bring to life those living narratives, but to connect the community with what's existing in the archive as well. And of course, to expand on the concept of collective biographies. That's very, very key to us. Strello developed some very extensive genealogical work mapping the histories of the families in the community, and we really want to work to bring those to life.
So just to sum up some of the questions that occur to us that we could put out there with regards to a kind of digital humanities framing of this work. How does the digital change conditions of sharing? Are these technologies universal, or do they need to be modified? And who in the end has access to digital knowledge, and does the digital divide in that way continue to exist, and how to in fact engage with it? Present.
Afternoon or good evening. My name is Juan Salazar. I'm an anthropologist working in media studies. And the project that I'd like to share with you today is it's an ethnographic and cultural digital research project in Antarctica. It's a work in progress that started around 18 months ago. And it's been funded by the University of Western Sydney and the Chilean Antarctic Institute. So I'll just put a website up, which is just going to play on the background so you can see some images. So this is a project, as I said, that started 18 months ago and has different layers or different smaller projects within it. One is a more traditional research around resurging nationalism in the Southern Ocean and the shifting geopolitics and new regional alliances forging in the Southern Ocean, and the relationship with emerging Asian powers, China, India, South Korea, and also South American countries with a long tradition of Antarctic engagement, both historical, cultural, and also in research. And also there is a project which is a speculative documentary film, and it's a science fiction documentary film. And that ties into a major concern of this project, where I think a digital humanities approach would be useful. As a second stage, because I'm less interested in knowing how the application of information technology is not only an aid to fulfill the humanities' basic tasks of preserving, reconstructing, transmitting, and interpreting the human record. As you may know, there's a very rich human record in the Antarctic going back 100 years. But my concern is not so much with that idea of preserving, reconstructing, and interpreting through digital tools, but how do we anticipate, preempt, mobilize, put into practice, and assemble different diverging futures. So part of the work that I'm doing is digital ethnographies about the future, so working with Antarctic communities in Punta Arenas and in the Antarctic Peninsula about how people anticipate, preempt those possible futures for the Antarctic. There is this view, perhaps, that in the Antarctic there's only animals and scientists, but the Chilean program has had for 25 years a small community of civilian population. It's not a permanent settlement. I mean, it is a permanent settlement, but people live there and they change the population every 2 to 3 years. and there is people that have been working there every summer for the last 30 to 35 years. So that's the people I'm doing that ethnographic record about how Antarctic futures are preempted. And that links into a program by the Scientific Committee of Antarctic Research based at Cambridge University, which is the international organization that oversees all scientific research in Antarctica, who have recently launched a program called Horizon Scanning about the future of science in Antarctica, and they're trying to visualize how Antarctic science research is going to be in 30 years, whether it's been using robotics or new technologies of remote sensing or data visualization, or less foot on the ground scientists and science done through different technologies. So I think digital humanities has a very important role to compare visualizing this future of the Antarctica and how this future of the can also be imagined and anticipated from the humanities. So that is a summary of my project in Antarctica. Thank you.
Hi everyone. As my colleague Juan said, wherever you are, morning, noon or night, it's very exciting. So I hope people are tuning in from all over the world. My name's Kate Richards. I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Western Sydney in the Humanities and Communication Arts School. I'm going to talk a little bit about my background because I think that might be useful and interesting for people, and a little bit about the Masters by Coursework degree that I run here at the university. I think I'm probably quite a typical digital humanitarian in that my undergrad and initial work was in communications and film, analogue of course, and then I moved into digital media through my Masters, which is in Fine Arts. And it was the need to introduce interactivity in my projects which drove me into digital media and away from the analogue. As a digital artist, I've done projects across almost every conceivable platform in the digital terrain. I've done data visualization, interactive installation, tablets, kiosks, CD-ROMs, the whole kit and caboodle. I've worked quite extensively with live performance, and I do a little bit of research work as what I'm calling a new media dramaturg, where I work with theatre directors and help them understand how to use digital technologies and techniques to enhance their creative vision. So that's a quite interesting area of my research. A couple of projects worth mentioning. I think that Harold very kindly put the link to Life After Wartime amongst the information. That's a project I've been working on since 1999 with a colleague, Ross Gibson. And it's predominantly a database project. We're working with 3,000 original scene of crime photographs from Sydney from the mid-20th century, and they're in a database. And we've produced 8 or 9 different projects over 15 years using that database. Each one has a very different approach to audience, different approaches to interactivity, combinative strategies, generative aesthetics, and so on and so forth. We're about to open a new iteration of that project next Saturday in Sydney at the International Symposium of Electronic Art. So that's exciting. And that's, I think, a really good example of working with databases and digital aesthetics to produce different outcomes for different audiences and different forms of engagement. My current research is also particularly around affect and the potential of environments with high affordance to provide highly affective experiences for audiences. So that's something that I'm working on through my PhD. I've also done, I want to talk about another project here at University of Western Sydney. With a small amount of funding from the school last year, I initiated a data visualization project with people from the School of Engineering and Mathematics and a colleague from design here at UWS. And we're looking at the potential for data visualizations to actually be the new technological uncanny and the new sublime. So that's a very exciting area. Obviously, data visualization has become huge. There's a lot of debate around big data. So we're raising the question, can a highly aesthetic data visualization represent the new sublime and the new technologically uncanny, particularly if that data is collected from dark sorts of human activities. The final thing that I'm going to chat about is the master's coursework that master's by coursework degree that I run here at the University of Western Sydney. It's a master's in convergent media. It's the first one that we know of in Australia and possibly internationally. It's been running for about 5 years. We're targeting the degree at media professionals who need to deepen and broaden their experience of working in the convergent space. We use Henry Jenkins' definition of convergence, and we're finding that incredibly applicable to the Australian industrial context and obviously also the digital humanities context. The students that we have in the Masters range from people with journalism backgrounds, broadcast, design, and through to PR and marketing. So it's a very interesting mix, and it's a very intergenerational cohort. I have 23-year-olds and I have a 60-year-old at the other end of the scale, so that's very exciting. And I'm not sure how many more minutes I've got. 2 more minutes. What else can I talk about? Digital humanities. We've got a new research group here also that we're calling the Bureau, which comprises Hart and Wan, who you've already met, and a few other people. We're looking there at developing a strong research culture around digital media and digital humanities within our particular interest. You saw Hart and Wan talk about digital ethnography, and also data visualization is part of that. What else can I say that's about Sydney? There's trying to think of anything that might be of interest to people. Oh, yes, well, I could talk about more projects, I suppose. As an artist, there's, I think, Harold put on the information, a project of mine, Bystander, which is part of that Life After Wartime project. And I think Harold thinks that's a very interesting one. It's an immersive project where the audience can kind of play the database. Another project that you might like to look up was called Wayfarer, and that was like a live game where we had actors being the gameplay, and that was all driven by voice commands from the participatory audience. So that was another interesting project. I don't know if I've got very much more to say. Thanks for joining us, and I hope everything's great in your part of the world. It's obviously tricky times for all of us. So all the best, and please look up my website and my staff profile, and I'm more than happy to discuss any questions. And I also did want to mention, that's right, there's quite a few other digital artists working here at University of Western Sydney, and I think Harold was quite keen for me to to point that out. There's several artists of national and international note who are working particularly in the design area. So it's a really exciting and interesting school. So thanks heaps. See ya.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Just getting my slides set up. Well, my name... Oh, hang on, we'll wait till they're sorted. Ta-da. Thank you. My name's Dr. Samantha Edwards-Vandenhoek, and I lecture in the Bachelor of Design Visual Communication degree at the University of Western Sydney. My research interests are primarily situated at the nexus of visual communication studies, digital archaeology, documentary photography and placemaking. The focus of today's presentation is on the conceptual framework of the practice-based outcome, which was a digital archive of my recently completed doctoral thesis. In brief, my PhD research intervenes in the material traces of graffiti writing and urban art production from Sydney's recent urban past, to further insights into the relationship between place and cultural practice. The central premise of the thesis is that graffiti's transgressions vary across spatio-temporal registers, modes of practice and material placements. The research method draws from an expansive transdisciplinary frame that combines and weaves connections between archaeology, photography and design, what Michael Shanks refers to as archaeography. I consider the photographic analysis of material culture to be an archaeological matter because of artefacts of the methodological process of disclosure. Photographs capture temporal fragments which, through my own personal reframing, makes further interventions and understandings possible. Post-PhD, this research is now focused on how the Sydney Graffiti Archive, as a dynamic and agile virtual interface, further intervenes in, shapes and transforms the experience of graffiti that I have framed in the Archaeograph to reimagine graffiti's place as digital heritage. By and large, graffiti is perceived as the blight on the built environment. I mean, I've had people come up to me that were physically repulsed by the nature of my research. People couldn't understand why I would possibly want to research tagging. So most of my project is largely about creating a framework within which to kind of evidence my claims, this claim for digital cultural heritage. And to me, the Graffiti Archive is more than simply a way of sharing the body of imagery analysed in my thesis. It is an intervention. It's intentionally meant to intervene in a discourse about graffiti as a form of cultural heritage and what this means to me, to you, to everybody else. It also involves broader matters of conservation, ownership and value, identity and belonging, the shifting capital of knowledge and the way the internet changes how we distribute it and perceive it. The Sydney Graffiti Archive, like McDowell 2006, argues for graffiti as cultural heritage rather than damage to it. There have been instances where graffiti or collections of photographs such as my own have been deemed to have historical value because they capture a broader or a mainstream slice of Australiana and or the political climate of its time. Unfortunately, very little attention has been paid to the ordinary, fragmentary and often confronting texts, such as the one in this image, and inaccessible sites. These include things like the building interiors, drains, sewers, pipes, factories, warehouses, forts and batteries, which was the large focus of my thesis. So what has come out of all of my research and the multimodal analysis of the archaeographs is that obviously graffiti is not a meaningless or senseless endeavour. It is about minority groups, it is about communication, it's about expression. It's not a load of symbolics, as this image might suggest. It is a situated practice where meanings and identities, tensions and dialogues are embedded in graffiti spaces of production. From all of this, I argue that the cultural value of graffiti lies largely in its contextual responsiveness. It's really important for me to say that my research is not about a call for preservation of sites. Graffiti is inherently an ephemeral practice, but rather it's a call for the recognition of their fleeting transience and reminders of a time and place, and crucially here for signalling the archaeographs as digital heritage ontologies. This in turn heralds the Sydney Graffiti Archive as a place of cultural pilgrimage. So in support of my claim that this archive and its photographic tableau intervenes in graffiti's hybrid material assemblage and the public perception of it, the virtual territories of graffiti production have been conceptualised as Foucault's heterotopia. I draw from Lefebvre's spaces of collective resistance, what Saussure refers to as microclimates or third spaces that operate in non-hegemonic conditions. Heterotopias are politically charged, marginalised and transient environments where a new and different form of citizenship can be defined and realised, such as those of a graffiti crew perhaps. As Foucault argues, this is because heterotopias are temporal zones that operate within but bypass conventional social structures and power relations. In doing so, the digital archive encourages new ways of seeing illicit graffiti and other everyday digital cultures of commemoration, and that it reshapes present relationships to the past, future and the present through user engagement. And from this standpoint, cultural archives like mine therefore have the ability to reflect, infiltrate and transgress normative conceptions of our experiences of place. Moreover, unlike the subterranean and interior territories of graffiti production, the archive is not an illicit or an out-of-bounds kind of place. As such, the archive makes the inaccessible accessible. It brings the insight out, reveals and discloses long after graffiti's trace has been erased from the urban experience. As such, it affords a place to inhabit as well as a place to impact on meaning-making with the same material reference and assemblage in different ways, to generate new experiences of politically contested public space. As the Sydney Graffiti Archive suffers from multiple viewing contexts, temporal compression and a largely undefined corpus of users at this stage of my research, it is more a form of displacement than emplacement. However, it is in the design, the multimodal interest and the digital materiality of the archive that clarifies its place as a powerful reflexive mnemonic.
As Emery confers, collective memory needs images and a spatial framework, virtual or otherwise, to suspend time and assert it within space. As such, the virtual heterotopia of the Graffiti Archive offers a world without limits or absences other than those set by the creator, with the illusion of permanence, to reveal these new socio-cultural connections, focused on its attempts to subvert conventional ones. Importantly, the digital archive also affords a means of distancing from the temporal moment of graffiti's perceived crime, which in turn provides a means to challenge public perception and for the graffiti to be read and interpreted in different ways. So this is the significance of the archive, my archive, maybe not tomorrow, but in the years to come. I don't have the time to show you the archive in its entirety today, but I encourage you to go online and experience it for yourself. Multiple search engines, different ways to search the collection database. I'm in the process of adding soundscapes and film recordings of my endeavours breaking into buildings and so forth, which don't really form part of the official part of the research, but they will be there as part of the experience. So the long-term impact of the archive lies, to me, in its partially hidden, yet to be explored depths and untold stories. As Shanks recognises, we are all archaeologists now. This is our story, my story, your story, and it can be a different story. That's the exciting part. My hope is that these alternative narratives are revealed through the user engagement with my site, its collections, its multiple search modes, the social media presence and integration that I have, the virtual derives, the blog, which involves the kind of active construction of these new plot lines and experiences of graffiti's place through the production of new graffiti archaeographs over time. So where I'm at now involves observing and analysing the site traffic through Google Analytics and other means to acquire knowledge about the social networks interacting with the site, both nationally and internationally. This includes where they're referred from, how they're engaging with the site and sharing the resources. I'm also hoping to collaborate with others to, fully realise the interactive dimension of this experience and also bring it back to the real world as part of a launch that's happening later in the year towards Christmas. I feel like that aspect of the site has not been fully realised, and in particular the effective dimension of the images and how people engage and what they want to communicate and say about them. So in conclusion, what I believe is that, to me, the future of digital archaeology as an intervention in the fragmented discursive matter of material culture lies in its application of its working framework to other cultural assemblages. So this isn't just about graffiti. In particular, approaches that attempt to move beyond these kind of artefact typologies and embrace social media and these kind of unplanned for interactions, which are so hard to kind of understand and map and quantify or qualify, and particularly ones that, to me, encourage personal, intimate, or eclectic, categories of significance. That's what's made this project so meaningful to me, that it's been so personal. And I also hope this research encourages others to engage with these networks and to tell their stories about graffiti and its relationship to their urban experience through my archive. So thank you very much. That's all from me. See ya.
Do I just go? Yep. Yeah. Hi everybody. This is really weird. Talking to people I can't see and my colleagues sitting behind me and staring at my back. So look, I guess I don't have a formal paper to read. What I would really like to do is just tell you who I am, what project I'm engaged in, why I'm engaged in the project I'm engaged in, and how I'm sort of doing it. The first thing I need to say, though, is that it is a collaborative project in many senses, but probably most primary. My collaborator, Anna Gibbs, isn't with us today. She's at a conference in Hobart, and she's the one that I work with. The project I want to talk about is a project that's funded by the Australia Research Council. It's a discovery project, and it's called Creative Nation, Writers and Writing in the New Media Arts. Both Anna and I have a background in literary studies and writing. We began in a School of Humanities and ended up ended up a few years ago, quite luckily, in a School of Communication, Design and Media. So we had very early exposure to digital culture, and modes of communication that weren't necessarily familiar to humanities scholars, particularly those with a literary background. Anyway, the project that we're engaged in basically grew from an interest in thinking through how forms of writing have changed over the last, 20 years or so. The way that writing has migrated off the page of a book and across, other media, so that we now look at writing on different forms of screens, as Sam before me was showing us, also on physical landscapes. We became interested in the way that literary writing was happening in digital and online contexts, and started thinking about the way in which old ways of conceiving genre were not necessarily useful in this new context. So the project started in terms of, trying to analyse and also think about how we could think about new taxonomies in online contexts. What are the new genres that are emerging in electronic literature? So the research project, on the one hand, deals with this this concern to sort of understand and classify an emergent phenomenon. And I think that, it's an incredibly exciting project. And I sometimes feel the way I think that artists must have felt, in the modernist period with the invention of film, that, film was kind of used in lots of different ways, and its kind of uses had to be invented, its forms taxonomized, and I have this sense that that's what's happening with what we're doing at the moment. Okay, so looking at new ways of thinking through genre, having this incredible opportunity to be part of how an emergent field is actually formed and how it might solidify if we're kind of that lucky. Caught up with this research is also sort of an interest in the way that new media and new forms of writing are actually affecting forms of subjectivity, the way in which reading is changing from a typographic context where it was a kind of a reflective activity to the way that reading is becoming, what is it becoming? It's caught up with writing. It's also caught up with gesture, with something that's doing something different to the human subject. Interiority is actually becoming an issue, I think, and a very interesting one. The problem of memory is a big one. With online literary forms, the capacity to backscan is problematic, and backscanning is one of the things that you can do with books. They're incredibly stable, solid objects. The solidity and the stability of writing in online contexts is changing. And so the question of memory, how are we to remember a poem or a piece of literary writing online when it moves and makes noises? The other kind of problem associated with our research is how do you store these forms of writing? What are the forms of archiving that are appropriate to storing for posterity these new forms that are emerging? And this leads me just to talk very briefly about the second part of our project, which is the construction of an online directory of Australian electronic writers and writing since 1990. This project has just been amazing in many different senses, in that we've ended up with some absolutely fabulous collaborators. There are people in the United States and in Norway. I'm talking here about the Electronic Literature Organisation in the US, Scott Reckberg's ELMSIT project in Norway, the POEX database in Portugal. We also have collaborators in Germany at the University of Siegen, and I think there's also Gabriel Gaudet at the University of Quebec with his NT2 project. So it's kind of international collaboration, in that what we're seeking is that the databases and the directories that we build that they be interoperable. It's a huge task because the field is so new, and there's been lots of discussions about how we make these databases interoperable. Anna Gibbs and myself would not have survived this process if it had not been for the wonderful Peter Sefton, who is sitting to my left and who will be talking later on in this symposium, who's helped us understand some of the technical language, but has also sort of been really important in the ways in which literary critics, electronic writers, people with technical know-how can actually work together to bring about what I think is a really important project for trying to think through the problem of storing something for posterity, when I think that solidity and stability in digital contexts is still sort of a real issue. I think that's about all I have to say. Okay, thanks everyone.
More time if needed. Well, I'll rely on your signs. Hello, good morning, good night. My name is Brett Nielsen, and I am the Research Director of the Institute for Culture and Society here at the University of Western Sydney. The Institute for Culture and Society is a large interdisciplinary research institute in the contemporary humanities and social sciences. The interests we have in the Institute range across areas such as globalization, heritage, citizenship, diversity, environment, and contemporary forms of economic transformation in their relation to culture and society. I believe I will be part of the round table that's closing this particular instalment of the event, in which I will discuss further the range of digital work that's happening in the context of the Institute. But now I would like to discuss a series of projects in which I have been involved together with my collaborator, Professor Ned Rossiter, who's also a member of this same institute and the School for Humanities and Communication Arts here at the University of Western Sydney. And this is a series of projects that aims to engage questions of digital culture, logistics, labour, infrastructure, and globalisation in the contemporary world. One way to position these projects is to place them in relation, on one hand, to the digital humanities, and on the other hand, to digital media studies. These are both complex and multiform fields which have various traditions of research running through them by now. But if we were to think in a very schematic way how we might characterize their differences, we could say that the digital humanities is interested in pursuing innovative digital methods using technologies, software, various techniques that have been invented around the transformations that are going on to engage with the research objects of the humanities as it has evolved over the decades, indeed the centuries. On the other hand, we could see digital media studies as being very much concerned with the role of digital media within culture and society. where they go, what they do, how they affect the realms outside of their own particular path of development. In this sense, we can say that digital media studies has a particular engagement with the latest kind of transformations, but methodologically it's quite different from digital humanities in that often you will see very traditional humanities or social sciences methods deployed in order to understand these new technological developments. So to give an example, you see many projects that want to do an online form of ethnography, going online, doing participant observation in that space. It's a technique that's transferred offline, online. Now, the logistics work in which I'm engaged tries to work through both these particular fields, to intervene in them and to challenge them in certain ways. So we are interested in the way in which logistics software affects the experiences of labour forces, affects the way in which global mobilities work and in which global connections are made, and affects the way in which the contemporary economy functions. So on the one hand, you can think about debates that have been going on around processes of globalization and transnational connection. Within the humanities and social sciences, there's a multiplication of metaphors for what's happening in this particular space. You think of notions like flow, connection, global-local relations. Mobilities is another big one. I could run them off, but there's been very little attention to the actual material and technological processes that enable these connections to take place. And logistics software is a very important one of these because it's very involved in creating connections, smoothing out rough edges, minimizing noise, optimizing systems, creating interoperability between different systems, surveying workforces, coordinating their activities, measuring their performance, and all to the end of creating profit. Here we see a role of software which is undoubtedly commercial and I would also argue highly political, exercising particular forms of power in the contemporary world, particular forms of governance which are quite different from those exercised by nation states or global bodies of governance such as the United Nations or the International Labour Organization. And we begin to engage with processes of making the world in an economic way that are really quite crucial to the way in which contemporary economy works and the way in which contemporary modes of linking up, even the kind of linking we are doing now, is being enabled by particular technical routines and software packages. This takes us into a very different space than most digital humanities projects because the kind of software we're interested in is not widely available, open source or licensed in accessible way software that can be easily purchased by institutions such as university. We're interested in software which is privately owned, which is commercially precious, which is inaccessible to researchers apart from the option of kind of buying packages. So we're interested in the kinds of large so-called enterprise enterprise resource programming packages, ERP, which are the kinds of software platforms that large corporations, think of corporations like Amazon or large courier companies like DHL, or the kinds of platforms being created by companies like SAP, which extend across many different kinds of contemporary global capitalist enterprise. How do we study these packages? How do we understand the way they are acting in the world when there's a big kind of firewall up between us, the researchers in the university, and this kind of software, which we see as incredibly critical and crucial as a space for getting into and conducting research and thinking critically and creatively in order to be able to intervene productively and powerfully in the debates concerning contemporary society, culture, and economy. It's a methodological challenge which, from our perspective, neither the digital humanities nor digital media studies are helping us with immediately. We have to draw on the archives of both these fields and make it up as we go to see where we can get. So certainly we have been pursuing methods similar to ones that have been mentioned by other participants in this seminar, such as digital visualization. But here we face the usual problems that people that are doing digital visualization face. You know, what kind of program are we going to use? How are the pictograms going to look? What kind of interactive features will be built in? But even more, we face the problem of how are we going to get the data that we all need to build the kinds of digitalizations that we use. It's not relatively available. It's not necessarily publicly accessible. We can piece together data about certain logistical operations, let's say crane rates in ports or truck turnover times in container terminals. Some of this is publicly available, but it's very patchy and it's very different for different nodes in a global logistical network. So to take the example of container terminals, one of the reasons these businesses are so powerful is because they do run standardized software packages across all their global operations sites. But the data that will be available at any one of those sites is going to be radically heterogeneous. So this means we can intervene on the edges. We can take publicly available data, for instance, from the annual reports of ports or governmental bodies concerned with running ports. We have partnerships with organizations such as the International Transport Federation, which has a very heavy investment in this area because of the way in which logistics software does control and monitor labour performance, often in real time. But we also are working with industry engagements. For instance, here in Sydney, we are partners in a project called the Future Logistics Living Lab, which is run by National ICT Australia, which is a kind of think space, an industry-led think space for creating efficiencies and optimizations within the space of the logistics industry. And through these engagements, we're able to have conversations with programmers who are working on projects such as SAP and get access to the latest kind of programming they're doing, sometimes even to the code. For us, the question is, how do we utilize this access that we have? How do we take the uneven and heterogeneous data that we have and move it through into a kind of analytic representation which might take the form of a visualization, it might take the form of a game, or it might take the form of a more traditional kind of ethnographic engagement. How do we gather this data and move it through to a form of presentation that has an analytical and political end? I can't say much more about this, but I can add as a final kind of quiver that very often the problem for us is that we want access to commercially valuable data to do things that are not commercially valuable. We have to buy commercially valuable data in order to devalue it and to do something interesting with it. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name's Peter Sefton. I'm the e-research manager for the University of Western Sydney. That means e-research is a small support unit which is designed to help researchers with their IT and communications needs. One of the things we do is act as a consultancy and get involved in some of the larger projects. The project I'm talking about today is the HCS VLab. That's the Human Communication Science Virtual Laboratory. This is funded by one of our federal government programs called Nectar, which is an e-research program. So that's about $50 million spread across the sector, very much driven by researcher requirements. So a number of the large infrastructure projects in Australia had been given out to people who did work that was supposed to support research, and we spent a lot of money on things that people didn't end up using. So this one was directed at, the call for participation went out to research teams who had actual problems. So University of Western Sydney, along with about a dozen other organisations, managed to secure one of these projects in the area of human communication science, which is probably centred around linguistics, but also includes musicology, psychology, and other related disciplines. I'm involved in this project as a kind of IT expert and project support. The words here come from Steve Cassidy, who's a computer scientist and linguist. We have linguists and lots of other people from the disciplines involved in this as well. There are really two main parts to the lab. There's a corpus section, which is building a repository of corpora that exist in the linguistic world, but have been difficult for people to get their hands on. So linguists would have to obtain them by emailing people, obtaining DVDs, compiling data themselves. And the thing we're doing here is bringing these things together. So there's text and recorded speech, audio, video. There's video of people singing songs, so there's ethnographic stuff in there as well. So a large part of this has been building a repository, which is catalogues so people can search, browse and find data. And the other part is linking it to tools so that people can actually process things. And tools are probably an even bigger problem for data for a lot of researchers in this area to get their hands on. There are toolkits for doing language analysis, for analysing text or analysing audio and video, but a lot of them have quite a learning curve. And the idea of this system is to bring both of these things together online. So I have a couple of screenshots. The content of this doesn't really matter. This is early test data. But this is a typical repository discovery system. You have a faceted browsing thing on the left of the screen where people can browse through multiple corpora, so there's all sorts of stuff in there, including text, audio, video, and there'll be large amounts of music, recorded music in there as well. So you can select things that are normally not seen together on the basis of various parameters. Here I've selected everything that was tagged as written in our initial test corpus. And then the very exciting part is that you can then take the data that you've selected in the discovery layer and feed it straight into tools. So instead of having to work out how to install the tools, wait for your IT department to come and help you, buy a new computer, learn about how to run something like the Python Natural Language Toolkit NLTK, you can press a button and go from selecting data to having an environment in which to run it. So the screenshot I have here is you discover data in a repository, you click a button and you end up in this thing called Galaxy. Galaxy is probably new to most people in this digital humanities world because it comes from genomics. So this is a workflow platform which was designed for use by scientists processing gene sequencing data, where for similar reasons that we have with our community, they wanted to make it so that people could take a data set and then run certain analytical processes across it in an easy way. So there's no time for a complete discussion of this, but this allows you to set up little tools in a workflow and then drag and drop them and connect them together with arrows so that you can select some data and have it run through 3 or 4 different processes in sequence. So I've just taken some data from the discovery service and I'm putting it through word frequency analysis, which is a pretty trivial example, but we now, from the text that I selected, you get a table of word frequencies. So you could do further analysis on this. You could graph it. You can run lots of other linguistic tools, and we'll be adding things for processing audio signals, so you can pull out all the vowel sounds in a particular set of entries from one or more of the corpora. So this is the first version of the application of the lab, which had about $1.3 million worth of Australian government funding and a total project budget of around $3 million, running over 3 years. So we're only a few months in, and we've started to see how we can tie the discovery of large amounts of data that had not been joined up before with tools that were difficult for people to use before, and we'll see where this takes us with the community. So at the moment we're seeking feedback from the users about whether this is useful and which direction to take it. So that's the essence of my thing. I went as quickly as I could.
Okay, good. Thank you, David.
Hello, my name is Tomáš Trešák. I am a postdoctoral researcher in digital humanities, working in the School of Computing and Mathematics. My background is in artificial intelligence, where I was performing research in virtual worlds, virtual reality, and intelligent virtual agents. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about virtual worlds, about the benefits they provide for the digital humanities community. And I'm going to talk about the projects that we've done in order to facilitate their definition, specification, and execution. So, for those that haven't bumped yet into virtual worlds, they are computer-simulated 3D environments where we perform our actions using avatars, and we fulfill our goals by interacting with other avatars or with the environment. The benefit of using virtual worlds is that their users have a very high sense of presence. They are immersed in the simulation, so therefore they act very naturally. So this gives us somehow low-cost environment, how we can observe our test subjects, the participants, and then gather data which can be further analyzed of their behavior. So, although it's a cool technology, it's quite problematic because the cost of development is quite high, and it takes really a lot of effort to design and execute such a virtual world. Moreover, there was no specific methodology how to define virtual worlds and how to validate if this specification is okay. There was no methods of how to define and structure interactions in the virtual worlds, how to control them, and there was no means of like generic means of introducing artificial intelligence or agents in the virtual worlds. We could use agents in tasks where, for example, human users are not feasible, or we want to substitute them with some automated beings. So, moreover, there was no other means of how to structure interactions between human users and these artificial participants, agents. So, in the first run, Anton Bogdanovic proposed the methodology for definition and execution of virtual worlds called virtual institutions, which somehow defines how to structure interactions in the virtual world and how to isolate activities that can be performed in the virtual world. So in this example, we see a specification of a virtual world that is running an auction house, let's say, with a couple activities defining the registration of auction items or gathering information. So seeing that this it can be visualized as a graph structure. Well, we are thinking about, let's take this to the next level and try to actually generate the whole virtual world out of this specification. So we've extended the existing technique called shape grammars. It's a computational design technique, and we extended it in a way that we took the specification of the virtual world and then generated the 2D representation of it, somehow floor plan, the 2D floor plan, which then we transform into the full-scale 3D virtual world model. The cool part about this technology is that we can use different transforming engines to transform this into several virtual worlds. So when we had this static virtual model, it still needed to be somehow connected to this specification. So we needed to add interactivity into it. So in our next project, we've created this virtual institution execution environment, which provided a middleware which connected this generated 3D model with execution environment, which was running this specification, this virtual institution. This provided us the causal connection, so all the actions in the specification were transformed in the virtual world and vice versa. And cool part about this technology is that it could combine several running virtual worlds with the same specification. So we could have, for example, auction running in several virtual worlds like Second Life and PlayStation. And so all the users from different virtual worlds could participate in the same simulation. This solution is also completely generic, so it can be reused for the various types of simulations. In the next project, we took a look how to actually populate this generated interactive world with agents. So there are tasks where we cannot afford to have humans performing for all the tasks in the virtual world. So, for example, large-scale simulation as like a historical simulation of cities where we want to populate them with There existed a lot of means how to create such population, but there was no generic way of doing that, and programming artificial intelligence is a very complex task. So we came up with this design of virtual agents, which are able to perform many tasks automatically. So during the generation process of this 3D model, we actually annotated this environment with many information coming from the specification, and therefore we are able just to give very high-level goals to the agent. For example, I don't know, winning an auction, and this agent can automatically detect many data that he needs in order to perform his actions. So this was good for the single agent. So we were looking at how to create a large-scale population of such agents. So how to populate the whole city with agents, and moreover, how to make these agents look and behave believably. So, the most basic way of doing that is to basically clone one existing agent into 1,000 instances, but that wouldn't produce a very believable result. So we would see each population member to be completely equal. So it took interest in genetic reproduction and the biological processes of reproduction, and that's exactly what we did. We isolated the visual features of avatars and encoded these visual features into so-called genes, which genes form the chromosomes. And then using similar principles than in the biological reproductions, we combine those chromosomes and we're able to produce visually unique children. The cool part about this is that it maintains the ethnical features of parents, and therefore it very much mimics the actual biological reproduction. So with these 4 projects, we introduced quite powerful methods which could help researchers and people from non-technical fields to design a virtual world and to set up basically a virtual laboratory where it can perform experiments, then basically hire some human participants which can perform some tasks and obtain this data. Part of our future work, we would like to add more intelligence into the agents that we talked about before, these artificial participants. So we had like to add more believability, so adding, for example, personality or physiological needs. And a very interesting part is adding the cultural information for these agents. So each agent would become part of some specific culture, and we could study, for example, the cultural dissemination between agents by looking at obtaining the knowledge from different cultures. Thank you very much. I hope you liked our projects.
My notes are messier than your notes.
Well, we've passed the halfway point in this program, and at this stage we're going to go to a number of sessions that are looking more broadly, including this short slot where Ian and I are going to be talking about developments in Australasia more broadly. My name's Paul Arthur, and it's a great privilege to be here, and indeed an honour to be coming to work at this really dynamic and innovative institution and to lead the new research group in digital humanities. This event, in fact, has already given me the chance to meet some of my future colleagues, and I expect you, as the audience, will be as impressed and interested as I am in the range of work that's being done here. My role today, however, is to be here wearing the hat of the President of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities, and also as a project investigator and steering committee member of a very large collaborative project called HONEY, the Humanities Networked Infrastructure Project. And it's those two things that I'm going to talk about today, the establishment of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities and the Humanities Networked Infrastructure Project. AADH, as we call it, was formed in March 2011 at a workshop sponsored by the Australian Academy of the Humanities, held at the Australian National University. AADH is an organisation of individual members, and the association was established to serve what is a growing research community in Australia and in New Zealand in particular. But we also welcome membership from further afield, and indeed we have hundreds of members, in fact, from other parts of the world who are joining as part of the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organisations, which AADH is a constituent member of and has been since 2012. The mission of AADH is to promote and contribute to the development and advancement of digital research methods in the humanities, arts and social sciences. Its vision is to raise the profile and representation of digital humanities in Australasia by fostering exemplary research and supporting a growing community of practice. Over 250 delegates attended the AADH inaugural conference in 2012, which I co-convened with my colleague and collaborator at the ANU, Catherine Bode. And these delegates came not only from our region of Australia and New Zealand, but also the United Kingdom, Europe, Asia and North America. Its theme was Building, Mapping and Connecting. The second AADH conference, I'm pleased to announce, will be in March 2014 at the University of Western Australia on the theme of Expanding Horizons. Now, at the same time that the AADH was being formed, which is a process of a number of years in the lead up to its actual formation, but during that time, members of that community, in collaboration with many others, were working on a very large project proposal to the Australian Government's NECTA, or National E-Research Collaboration Tools and Resources Project, which is a $47 million research infrastructure initiative, which Peter Sefton was referring to in the previous presentation. And in a national first in this country, this humanities project proposal was successful, and it now represents one of the most ambitious virtual research environment projects of its kind worldwide, led by Deakin University and Professor Deb Verhoeven. While there isn't time to go through what this slide actually means, you can tell it's impressive, and what it shows is that HONEY is a linked data project that will combine information from 28 of Australia's most important cultural data sets and build a virtual laboratory that will enable researchers to work with this large-scale aggregation of linked data. These source data sets comprise more than 2 million authoritative records capturing the people, places, works and events that make up the country's rich heritage. The virtual lab will facilitate specialist research and allow researchers from different disciplines to uncover new insights into Australia's cultural landscape and share their findings with others. The project began in June 2012 and is scheduled to run till December 2013. Like the establishment of the Australasian Association for Digital Humanities, the HONEY NECTA Virtual Lab and Tools project has been a catalyst for collaboration and building the profile of digital humanities in this region, with benefits that have gone far beyond the individuals involved directly with the project to much wider communities and to raising the profile of digital humanities here and indeed through our influence internationally. I'm going to pass over at this stage to Ian Johnson from the University of Sydney, who's a very highly respected leader in digital humanities endeavours in this country, and indeed has been over a long period of time in the archaeological computing area, but also much more widely, and indeed is a major participant and contributor to the HONEY project. It's a privilege to have you here, Ian, to comment on digital humanities in Australasia, including, and the reason that this slide has been up is the recent establishment of the Australian chapter of CAA.
Well, thank you, Paul, for that very generous and perhaps not entirely deserved introduction. So I'm going to talk, you can skip the first slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about CAA, and I quite independently captured exactly the same screen, so there's an easy transition from one to the next. Right. So CAA has been running for about, in fact, 41 years. This was the 41st conference, and it was founded originally in the UK, moved to Europe, and has been twice to the States, once to China, and this year, for the first time, to the Southern Hemisphere in Perth. And we also got about 250 people, which was very good. Because we did our original estimates on perhaps we might get 100 people, so we're very, very happy that the conference was highly successful. In fact, it was held in the same conference centre as the Digital Humanities AADH will be held next year at the University of Western Australia. I was actually at the second of the CAA conferences, which has computer applications in archaeology, which has been really a sort of litmus test of the evolution of computing in archaeology, because it has published conference proceedings every year. So now we have to publish this year's and not break the chain. But it provides a sort of a review of where archaeology has been with computing over that 40-year period. And that's, I think, particularly valuable. And archaeologists have been involved with computing from a very early time, as testified by the longevity of the conference, because we deal with a lot of very small, individually insignificant bits of information, the length and width and thickness of stone tools and things like that. So databases have been, and statistics have been, part and parcel of archaeology, not just computer applications in archaeology, for a very long period. And more recently, people have got into mapping, have got into 3D visualization, virtual worlds, and 3D scanning is the sort of the latest, greatest high technology application in archaeology. So 3D scanning of monuments and even of excavations as they're taking place. So we're hoping that CAA Australasia, we're one of about, I should have checked how many, but several, probably 6 or 8 by now, maybe more, national chapters. We're one of the newest. And we're hoping to develop a program of get-togethers and training sessions and so forth in Australia and New Zealand. Doing much the same segue as Paul did, I'll go from the organisation to the Nectar project. So I guess I've been to many, many meetings over about 10 years where groups of generally the same suspects, humanities, digital humanities scholars, have attempted to get some money out of the infrastructure funding, which has been very generously passed to the sciences, but has totally failed to come to the humanities. So there's been quite a number of a program called Backing Australia's Ability, which was $650 million. And then there was a small part of that which was about collaboration and communication. That was around $50 million. We thought we might get some funding. We didn't. And it seemed like a hopeless case. But in fact, in this Nectar round, the humanities have done extremely well with 2 virtual laboratories and 2 research tools. So the virtual laboratories are Honey and the HCS that Peter Sefton talked about. Both of them trying to do the same sort of thing in a way of providing search tools to search across multiple collections of material, pull them together, and provide easy access to tools within the laboratory where you don't have to install everything separately, know about how to run Unix and so forth. And one of the projects, the 20 or 30 odd data sets that's going to go into that is the Dictionary of Sydney, which is a project we've worked on over a number of years. It's a public encyclopedia of Sydney history, about 1 million words in a series of entries, and the entries are highly linked to sets of different entities, so people, places, structures, events, etc. And the pages of the dictionary are generated from all of these interlinked entities. So this example of Lachlan Macquarie has a lifeline, a timeline of his life, also the people he's connected to, like the person he's married to, his architect, and so on and so forth. These are all, in fact, generated from a series of links from individual database records. So the public pages are structured from what is actually a very highly linked structure, which will become part of the Honey structure. So Honey will be harvesting RDF file of the information from the database and putting that into the searchable index and the tools for starting to pull things together, and then linking back to the Dictionary of Sydney website as well, and directly to the database. The database underlying, the database underlying the Dictionary of Sydney is called Hurist, huristscholar.org. It's a database that I've been developing with some programmers from my lab for, which I should say, in fact, I think I'm the only representative who is not from, or future shortly to be, from the University of Western Sydney. So I thank the University of Western Sydney for inviting me to this event. I'm at the University of Sydney. So Hurist, the database underlying this, is a generic database for humanities data, for rich, heterogeneous data sets. We have just this week, in fact, launched it as a Google Code open source website. And one of the things we've done this week also is the user acceptance tests for the Federated Archaeological Information Management System, which is one of the two virtual one of the two e-research tools that was funded by the Nectar program. So each of these projects is around $1 to $1.3 million. Not our part of it, but the overall project. So Honey we've already mentioned. I actually captured exactly the same image as you. And then FAMES, the Federated Archaeological Information Management System, is building, again with Intersect, one of the partners in the HCS and Honey projects. Intersect is the New South Wales e-research organisation. They're building a Android tablet field data collection system, which is extremely flexible, designed for archaeology, but in fact looks like it will be relevant to anybody collecting field data. And that could also include going to libraries and archives. It basically allows you to quite simply design a data collection system. It synchronizes multiple tablets into a central portable server that can run on a small laptop or one of these small portable servers. And our role with Hurist is, in fact, to synchronize the Hurist database to the central synchronization server of the Honey project, and to provide web publication capabilities, analysis capabilities, and visualization capabilities around that database, and also publishing to repository systems. So I think that wraps up the time I've got. I would like to, if I can spruik a little, invite people to visit huristscholar.org or to look for Hurist on the Google Code website, and perhaps come and participate in the open source development of the project. Thank you.
Okay, for our final event of today, tonight, and tomorrow, and yesterday, we're going to have a round table with our participants drawn in part from our presenters today, and one or two others as well. And I'll introduce them as they join. So,
I can sort of sit behind.
okay.
Yeah, I think.
I think we probably should move back a little bit so that we can all fit in. Okay, so I might start with just introduce people briefly, and Dan, you can let us know if everyone can be seen or not. So on my extreme right, but you're not necessarily extreme right, are you? Professor Simon Burrows, who's joined us recently, a professor of history at UWS. Kate Richards, who you were introduced to earlier, senior lecturer in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts, and convener of the Masters of Convergent Media. Brett Nielsen, Deputy Director of the Institute of Culture and Society. And on my left, Paul Arthur, the Foundation Professor in the Digital Humanities and President of the Australasian Association for the Digital Humanities. I'm really glad I remembered that. And joining us only after a few days on a very long airplane ride from King's College, University of London, Professor of Humanities. Humanities, isn't it? Not digital humanities.
Humanities computing.
Humanities computing. Is Professor Willard McCarty, and we're very pleased to have him here for the next few months to support our Digital Humanities Initiative. So we have approximately about a half hour thereabouts to conduct this roundtable, and I thought I would put out a couple of themes, but ask you just first to individually talk about your connection to the digital humanities, both within the terms of what you have been doing and with what you'll think you'll be doing in the next few months or a few years. I'll start with Brett Nielsen.
Okay, well, I will answer with my hat on as the Research Director of the Institute for Culture and Society, because I've already talked about the projects that I'm involved in individually. This is a large institute with a number of themes running through it by which we organise our research program, one of which is really focusing on questions of what we would call cultural and social digital research. The question of how this relates to the digital humanities is one that we've been discussing for a number of years, especially as the Digital Humanities Initiative has been taking shape at the University of Western Sydney. That this happened and is happening is a really wonderful thing, and I think it poses many opportunities. At the same time, I think we'd be naive to kind of pump it up too much because we are dealing with groups of researchers who I would say have evolved mature methodologies in their approach. So if I think about many of the colleagues that I work with in the Institute of Culture and Society, they have a very mature commitment to ethnographic work, which means to face-to-face conversation, meeting people, interviewing people, observing people going through their rituals of everyday life and so forth. And sometimes I have to admit it is a little bit difficult to make such people see the virtues of operating through the gauze of digital technologies or doing things on screen, because that's really where their intellectual commitment lies. So how do we begin to work with people who have that commitment as a core principle and see that very much as where data comes from, what data means for them is very different than what data means for someone working in the digital humanities who has to, have pixels or some kind of data set to begin to manipulate or to digitalize to work with. I think this is a conversation that we can have. The question is, what techniques do we use to see this? I mean, it's clear that there will be a generation of scholars coming through the humanities and scientists who are digital natives and who perhaps will just do this automatically. But where we are now, we really have to very carefully workshop this. We have to work collaboratively and in a way that is realistically recognises that collaboration is a difficult process. There's lots of rosy rhetoric surrounding it, but those of us who do it and have done it know that it is difficult. I think a good place to start is with actual projects, where we can sit down and begin to think of projects from the very beginning around the table together, where we can have people who pursue various methods. We have people with technological know-how who have to be seen as contributors to the project from the very beginning, rather than kind of, the tech person that comes in to troubleshoot all the problems. I think that's probably the best way for us to begin to kickstart things, which means not working from a blank slate, but thinking about the process in terms of project development. Because the themes we run, the larger sort of superstructure and administrative modes in which we have to work in universities. We can work at this level too, to keep having people come round with, software packages and things and give training routines. We have to keep doing it, but it's not the solution to our collaboration problems. It really involves that kind of communication.
Can I just intervene to say we've just been told that we have 15 more minutes and then they're going to cut us off, so we still have time in hand.
Okay, so we'll have to. Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you for that, Kate. Very quickly, on collaboration, perhaps.
I think what's been interesting about digitally enhanced media or the digitisation of media is that particularly what it has enabled is audience participation and engagement in a very, very different way. That for me was the big line in the sand when I moved from analogue media into digital media, was the necessity to have non-linearity in audience engagement. It also facilitates a whole new range of aesthetics, such as database aesthetics, emergent aesthetics, generative behaviours and those sorts of things, which are, again, have been played within analogue media but are not native to it. So that's been another big shift in introducing digital media. Speaking from that aspect in terms of digital humanities. In terms of collaboration, I think, and this is something we focus on in the Masters as well, is that we do need to find new models of working, new models for research, and new techniques and things like that. What's interesting is often, of course, the metaphors carry over from the analogue world, but still it's a whole new important way. And there's obviously been a lot of work done where digital production has meant that certain jobs have been lost, certain roles have been lost, etc., etc. There's been a lot of impact on the industry in that sense as well, but that's another discussion. Yeah, thanks, Hart.
Simon, points of contact with history, do you think?
Collaboration. I think one of the most interesting things about digital humanities is that it forces humanities people to get into whole new ways of working, and certain ways that we're measured as scholars don't necessarily fit very nicely with that, particularly the expectation of lone working, individually produced pieces of work, and once we get digital pieces of work that are very difficult to evaluate, that are the outcome of complex collaborations. Many of us who worked in the field will know that 2 or 3 minds are 10 to 1,000 times better than one for dealing with particular problems, and seeing that the solutions you offer are not going in some way to fail or distort data somewhere else down the line. I worked with a complex interrelational database. I'll say interrelational. It was interpretational as well as relational. And so if we changed the way we were working with any one part of that, we risked unbalancing everything else, and it helped to have 2 or 3 different takes on the different solutions we wanted to adopt to technical, methodological and practical problems. So we had to work together in that sense. I think collaboration's also very important for our students. We've not talked about teaching initiatives, and that's something I'm very keen to talk about in terms of history, in getting some of our undergraduate students to be conducting research for the first time, but also perhaps collaborative projects. The great disadvantage, again, for a humanities student is that they work in an environment which does not mimic much of the modern workplace, where people are expected to work as teams. And those that, like myself, were not particularly sporty in their youth and not team sporty might be confronted at job interviews one day with the question, talk about how you performed in a team environment one day, and actually have a blank in their experience there, perhaps. So I think this offers new ways of working at every level that we should think about.
Paul, in your sense of the future of the digital humanities space at UWS, is it going to be a case of team digital humanities, do you think?
Well, I think it certainly will be, because many would say that collaboration and group work is one of the characteristics of, one of the requirements even of large digital humanities projects. It's certainly not to say that you can't do very productive work alone, but it's that sharing and involving and bringing in, especially people with all sorts of different expertise and disciplinary backgrounds, that makes for some of the most wonderful, successful projects that are out there. I thought I might just say a couple of things. One was on the starting from the broader level and then coming down to the institutional, and that is that I think what we'll see soon is further institutionalisation of digital humanities of the kind that this university is leading, and it's already happening here. Perhaps this region's been a bit slow, actually, when you look around the world, given that there are quite a number of very successful programs in many countries. But you've also seen in the last couple of years this adoption of the term digital humanities as a language and a common denominator around the world, even across languages, even in languages where that isn't a term that makes a lot of sense because it refers to digits. And this is quite a remarkable thing, and it shows the power of language in bringing people together, but also just the sense of momentum and interest and energy. I think so, as well as institutionalisation, I think that we will start to see, and we should foster much stronger connections and collaborations between groups in this region. And I think it's true to say that Australia, while it may not have used the digital humanities term or language, has had some incredibly strong projects and people and groups and centres over time, over a couple of decades or more. But what's happened recently is that those groups and their projects are now starting to work together, not only through projects like the Humanities Networked Infrastructure Project, whose aim is actually to aggregate and bring together and allow collections to communicate, but through much more of a consciousness of the importance of collaboration and also the need for it. Competition is healthy, but collaboration is especially effective. Especially when each institution and group has its own strengths to offer. And finally, just the institutional, the broader picture would be that we need to be building links with our colleagues in other regions, especially, and I think it's probably appropriate to mention, since we've just come from going to Japan, our colleagues such as those in Japan, but of course elsewhere. And what I see at UWS is actually a similar situation mirrored here. Many projects and people, some of whom have done remarkable pioneering work over time, and yet have been doing it within their own space, perhaps, and maybe that is the strongest way it's been possible to support that. But now with the establishment of a new research group in digital humanities, this can become a framework that can support and really scale up many of those activities.
Great, thanks for that. Willard, this was an imagined community not only a few months ago for yourself and Harold. Now it's real. Can you talk a bit about that process, and then add anything you'd like, obviously, to give us a capstone to our day today?
The process of imagining it was, at least in my case, bringing to bear observation of the development of the field across the world for the last, well, it used to be within my experience of it since the mid-1980s, but since I became an historian of the field right back to the beginning of it. And that development seems to me to be a stepwise process, and I like to think of it as progressive, from extra academic to central academic status and identity. And the fact that this new research group begins with the appointment of a professor is extremely important in the development of the field. All those centers once famous, which I could name and which probably no one here would remember the existence of, disappeared because they were not academic foundations, because they did not take the intellectual dimensions and potentialities of digital humanities seriously, but thought of the field as if it were a service, just as we think of computing largely still as an application which helps something, rather than a means of, to quote Anthony Giddens, a reflexive reinvention of research and of who we are and of how we think. And that's been my preoccupation for some time. I'm not a cheerleader of this. I'm a skeptic of my own field, and have tried over the last many years to develop what I think of as a kind of bipolar awareness. I mean, that's psychologically perhaps not quite an appropriate term, but I have two minds simultaneously which bounce off against each other. One of them has to do with the digital and the other has to do with the humanities. I'm a very old-fashioned scholar, and I hold to that with ferocity, because I think it's the bipolar conversation between those two out of which comes the solution to the problem that Brett articulated, of actually bringing people to understand what it means to reason as human beings, to relate to the world as human beings in a world which is being fundamentally transformed. And I really believe that, not necessarily positively, but fundamentally transformed by digital. A way in which this is happening is illustrated by a book, preface to a book by Edward S. Casey called Remembering, a Phenomenological Study, in which he details the distortions of human memory that occur because we simple-mindedly think of computer storage as memory and then think of our memory as if it were computer storage. We reinvent ourselves in a kind of looping effect, as Ian Hacking calls it. So we have to be very watchful of what we're doing. And that's what I do, basically, is try to remain watchful of what's going on and to articulate it as clearly and as often and as emphatically as possible.
Yes, Simon.
We have 3 minutes.
Great. Simon.
Just very briefly, it seemed to me that one of the things behind what Willard's saying and driving at, also in this centre at any rate, is that everyone who spoke has, in a sense, started from a research base, from a set of research questions which apply to the humanities. I think the service model is beginning to go. We're beginning to see that the good projects are always research question driven, and anyone who's listening, who's thinking about whether they have a project, whether they can use this new disciplinary vocabulary, whether their digital humanities is the right thing for them, should start in a sense by asking, what are my research questions and does the digital facilitate it? And what is so exciting about this group is that we can reflect on what we're doing methodologically, but at the end of the day, everyone I've heard speak today has been talking very much about their research questions to start with. That's a strong position to begin from.
Yeah, very much so.
You could probably wrap it.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone on the panel, for the last half hour or so of your presentations and your opinions and positions on the digital humanities. Thanks to everyone who presented today. But the tweets have been coming in thick and fast. So there's a huge Twitter feed that's been responding to our presentations
thanks
as well.
For tweeting Binsey.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Dan Binns as well, who provided terrific technical support today. And so there you have it. I hope you're not too confused by my Canadian accent. This is not Alberta. This is Sydney, Australia. Signing off. Thank you.
So
So thank you very much to Australia, Western Sydney, for a fabulous closing panel. We have about one more minute before our video conferencing system turns us off. It was fabulous to have this sort of quick tour through what's happening at Western Sydney, and I think Ian Johnson's at just Sydney. I have a number of people that I would like to thank. This is the end of the Around the World Symposium on Digital Culture. There really are too many, but at the risk of missing some, I want to thank all the folks at the Arts Resource Center, Claire Peters, Grant Wang, Kamal Ranawira, Melania Rouhani, and Justin Gill, especially, who was our project manager who all worked setting this up. I'd like to also thank Oliver Roshian. Without him, this wouldn't have happened. He makes us shine. And Dave Colbert and the Rehab Medicine folks who have let us use this video conferencing system, which is really a lot better than Skype. So with that, I think I'm going to sign off, or just sit here and wait until the system signs me off automatically.